The grand chamber of the Zelthar Galactic Summit was filled with delegates from 100 different species. Towering insectoids chittered in hushed tones. Reptilian diplomats flicked their tongues, sensing the tension. Bioluminescent beings glowed faintly as they whispered to one another. But the Velari, the most elegant and aristocratic species in the galaxy, stood apart from the rest. At the center of them stood Lady Sci-Fi, tall and graceful, her silver-blue skin shimmering under the chamber lights. Her white-gold hair cascaded down her back, and her piercing violet eyes held an expression of amusement and disdain. She was surrounded by other Velari nobles, their long, slender limbs wrapped in fine, flowing robes of deep indigo and gold. On the opposite side of the chamber stood Captain Dorian Voss, representing humanity. Unlike the Velari, he was broad-shouldered and strong. His uniform fitted around a physique that spoke of endurance, not just appearance. His sharp green eyes took in the room, reading every reaction, every silent judgment. He had seen this before, aliens underestimating humanity. It always ended the same way. Sci-Fi stepped forward, her lips curved into a half-smirk. "So these are the humans," she said in a voice as smooth as silk. "I expected something more refined." Her gaze swept over Dorian and his team, her expression unimpressed. Dorian folded his arms, a subtle smile playing at the edge of his lips. "And I expected a welcome, not a critique." His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a quiet confidence that made some of the watching aliens shift uncomfortably. Sci-Fi let out a soft, musical laugh. "Oh, I do not mean to offend. It is simply fascinating." She turned to the other delegates, her expression one of mock curiosity. "Tell me, have you ever seen a species so rough, so unpolished? Their skin is so plain, their form so heavy." A few chuckles rippled through the audience. Other species, used to the Velari's arrogance, nodded in agreement. Dorian remained silent, letting her talk. He had dealt with people like this before. They mistook elegance for strength. "Perhaps," Sci-Fi continued, "humans do not care for aesthetics. Perhaps their world does not demand it. But surely, if they were truly advanced, their bodies would reflect it." She tilted her head, watching Dorian carefully. "Tell me, Captain, is there anything about your kind that is truly remarkable?" Dorian chuckled. "Plenty," he said, his voice light but confident. "But you'd have to look past the surface to see it." Sci-Fi's smirk widened. "Oh, then let us put it to the test." She gestured toward the vast hall. "A simple display of form and function. If humans are so impressive, then show us." Dorian exhaled slowly, shaking his head with an amused look. "All right," he said, "if that's what you want." And with that, he reached up and pulled his shirt off. The room went silent. Dorian's physique was unlike anything the Velari had ever seen. His chest and arms, sculpted from years of training and discipline, spoke of power, endurance, and survival. His muscles were not just for show. They were built from centuries of human evolution, designed to endure gravity, hardship, and war. There was nothing unpolished about them. Sci-Fi's expression shifted. Her smug amusement vanished. For the first time in her life, she was speechless. A stunned silence filled the grand chamber. Every eye was locked on Captain Dorian Voss. His broad shoulders, chiseled torso, and powerful arms were unlike anything the gathered aliens had ever seen. The humans had always been seen as a lesser species, physically unremarkable, technologically young. But now, standing before them, Dorian looked like a warrior forged by nature itself. Sci-Fi's violet eyes widened slightly, her usual cool arrogance faltering for just a moment. The Velari, despite their grace, had no visible muscle structure. Their bodies were slender, almost weightless, designed for elegance rather than raw power. Compared to them, Dorian looked like a being sculpted for survival, a living testament to endurance and strength. A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber. Some of the other species, previously dismissive of humanity, exchanged uncertain glances, A reptilian envoy from the Drekthar Dominion flicked his forked tongue, muttering something in his native tongue. A member of the Xerix collective, whose species had evolved in low gravity, tilted its elongated head in curiosity. Sci-Fi quickly recovered, folding her arms across her ornate robes. Her voice was smooth, but there was a new sharpness to it. Impressive, for a primitive species. Dorian smirked. "You're staring, Lady Sci-Fi." She blinked, then lifted her chin. "Aesthetic appeal means nothing if it lacks function. Surely you don't expect me to be impressed by mere bulk." She gestured to the gathered aliens. "Shall we put this to the test?" Dorian rolled his shoulders, the movement effortless, as if he hadn't just become the center of attention for half the galaxy. "What do you have in mind?" A Valari male, taller and leaner than Sci-Fi, stepped forward. Lord Silverin, a high-ranking noble, and one of the best physical specimens among the Valari, gave a condescending smile. "A contest," he said, his melodic voice carrying through the hall. "A test of endurance and agility. Surely you can handle that, Captain." Dorian let out a low chuckle. "You want to challenge a species built for survival. This should be fun." Sci-Fi waved her hand, and a holographic display lit up in the center of the chamber. The simulation flickered to life, forming a vast obstacle course. Walls to climb, platforms to leap across, gravity shifts, and endurance trials designed to push the limits of any species. Dorian studied it with mild amusement. "This all?" Sci-Fi's eyes narrowed. "We shall see if your strength is more than a mere display, Captain." The chamber lights dimmed as the challenge began. Lord Silverin moved first, his Valari grace on full display. He was fast, almost unnaturally so, his long limbs allowing him to leap effortlessly between platforms. He moved with a fluid elegance, untouched by the simulated gravity shifts. The audience murmured in approval. This was what the Valari were known for. Then it was Dorian's turn. With a powerful leap, he landed on the first platform with ease. The moment his boots touched down, he sprang forward, his movements precise and controlled. Where Silverin relied on speed and lightness, Dorian relied on power and raw athleticism. He vaulted over obstacles with practiced efficiency, using his strength to propel himself higher and farther than the Valari ever could. At the gravity shift, Silverin hesitated for a fraction of a second, recalculating his movements. Dorian. He adapted instantly. His species had evolved in variable environments, pushing through hardships that Valari had never known. By the time the final obstacle approached, a wall meant to test endurance and upper body strength, Silverin reached it first, trying to climb with his slender, agile frame. But the Valari's bodies were not built for brute force. He struggled, his grip slipping. Dorian arrived a second later. Without stopping, he grabbed the edge and hauled himself up in one smooth motion, muscles flexing as he lifted his entire body weight without effort. The audience gasped. Dorian landed at the finish line before Silverin could even pull himself halfway up. Sci-Fi's expression was unreadable. Dorian grinned, stretching his arms. "I was just warming up." Silence filled the chamber as Captain Dorian Voss stood at the finish line, breathing evenly. Across the obstacle course, Lord Silverin was still struggling to pull himself up the final wall, his long, slender limbs trembling with effort. The once confident Valari noble now looked anything but graceful. The gathered alien delegates stared, their previous amusement replaced by something new: respect, curiosity, and in some cases, unease. Dorian turned, hands on his hips, watching as Silverin finally dragged himself over the ledge. The Valari noble landed lightly on his feet, his silver-blue skin glistening with exertion, but there was no mistaking the embarrassment in his violet eyes. Sci-Fi's expression remained carefully neutral, but her fingers tightened against the fabric of her deep indigo robe. She had underestimated the human. Dorian gave an easy shrug. That was fun. What's next? A low murmur spread through the chamber. The other species had always admired the Valari for their beauty and agility, But now they saw something new, a limit. The illusion of Valeri perfection had been fractured by a single human. Sci-Fi finally spoke, her voice smooth but colder than before. Strength and endurance are useful, Captain, but we Valeri value more than mere physicality. A true superior being possesses skill, strategy, and intelligence. Dorian's grin never wavered. Good, because humans have plenty of that too. Sci-Fi gestured, and another holographic simulation activated. This time, the arena transformed into a complex battlefield scenario. Multiple moving targets, shifting obstacles, and unpredictable environmental hazards. A tactical challenge, Sci-Fi announced. Let's see if your species is as adaptable as you claim. Dorian studied the battlefield for a moment, his sharp green eyes scanning the layout. He had fought in real wars, led real soldiers, and survived real battles. This was just another puzzle. Silverin, now clearly determined to reclaim his dignity, took position first. The simulation began, and the Valeri noble moved with speed and precision. He darted between cover, his slender form weaving like a shadow, landing precise shots at the holographic enemies. His movements were fluid, nearly artistic, and the audience murmured their approval. Then Dorian entered the field. Where Silverin was graceful, Dorian was efficient. He didn't waste time on unnecessary movements. His human reflexes were sharp, his instincts honed from generations of survival. He fired faster, smarter, and with deadly accuracy. He anticipated enemy movements before they happened, adjusting to the shifting terrain as if he had trained for it his entire life. The gap between them became painfully clear. Silverin relied on practiced precision, but Dorian relied on experience, adaptability, and sheer battle-hardened instinct. When the final score appeared on the display, the chamber erupted into whispers. Dorian had won. Again. Sci-Fi's violet eyes darkened, though whether it was from frustration, disbelief, or something else, even she didn't seem sure. Dorian smirked. Still think we're just brutes. Sci-Fi didn't answer right away. For the first time, she looked at him differently, not as an inferior being, but as something unexpected, something dangerous, something she could no longer ignore. A heavy silence filled the grand chamber. The Valeri, once confident in their superiority, now shifted uneasily. The other alien delegates, who had once laughed at humans, now murmured among themselves, casting curious and wary glances at Captain Dorian Voss. Dorian stood calm and relaxed, his strong frame at ease despite the weight of so many eyes on him. He had seen this before, the moment when a species realized humanity was not weak. Lord Silverin stepped back, his pride wounded but his expression neutral. He did not speak, but his silence was enough. He had lost. Twice. Lady Sci-Fi, however, was different. She remained still, her elegant face unreadable, her violet eyes locked onto Dorian, with an intensity that was hard to define. She had expected a simple contest, one where the Valeri would gracefully prove their dominance over the rugged, unpolished humans. Instead, she had witnessed something else. Dorian was not just strong. He was not just fast. He was something far more dangerous, adaptive. And adaptability was something the Valeri had never needed before. A change in the air. Sci-Fi lifted her chin, her silver-blue skin shimmering slightly in the chamber's soft light. Fascinating, she finally said, her voice controlled but quieter than before. Dorian smirked, folding his arms. Glad I could entertain you. Her lips twitched at his casual tone, but she didn't respond right away. Instead, she turned to the gathered delegates. It would seem that humans are different than we assumed. A reptilian Drekthar warrior gave a sharp nod. I have never seen a species that moves like that adapts like that. It is unsettling. A representative from the Xerix collective, a species of hive-minded beings, blinked its luminous yellow eyes. Unpredictable. Efficiency beyond expected parameters. Sci-Fi let their words settle before returning her gaze to Dorian. You are unlike any species we have encountered, Captain. Strength without refinement, skill without rigid structure. You fight as though the battlefield bends to you, rather than the other way around. Dorian chuckled. You should see what we can do when we're actually trying. Her eyes flickered with something. Was it curiosity? Annoyance? Intrigue? Perhaps a mix of all three. The unexpected offer. Sci-Fi exhaled softly, then did something no one expected. She stepped forward, close enough that the air between them felt charged with something unseen. You have proven yourself, Captain. But tell me, she tilted her head slightly, is your species as diplomatic as it is formidable? Dorian raised an eyebrow. That depends. Are you about to declare war or offer an alliance? A soft, amused laugh escaped her lips, the first genuine one of the evening. She extended a slender hand. A proposal, Captain. The Vaylari do not make mistakes twice. We recognize power when we see it, and I believe our two species have much to learn from each other. Dorian studied her for a moment. This was not the same woman who had mocked humanity at the start of the evening. Something had changed. Finally, he took her hand, his grip firm but respectful. I guess we do. And in that moment, the galaxy shifted. The grand chamber was no longer filled with quiet amusement or dismissive whispers. The Vaylari had seen what humanity was capable of, and the other species had taken notice. For the first time, the arrogant and graceful Vaylari were uncertain. Captain Dorian Voss stood tall, his strong form relaxed yet unshaken. Across from him, Lady Sci-Fi still held his hand from their agreement, her violet eyes studying him as if trying to see through him. She was no longer mocking. She was thinking, calculating. Then she released his hand and stepped back, her long silver-blue fingers curling behind her. A demonstration of strength is one thing, Captain, she said smoothly. But an alliance requires trust, and trust is earned. Dorian's sharp green eyes studied her. What exactly do you have in mind? Sci-Fi turned toward a glowing console in the center of the chamber. With a wave of her hand, a new holographic simulation flickered to life. Unlike before, this was no obstacle course or battlefield scenario. It was a crisis simulation. Dorian's eyes narrowed slightly. The display showed a Vaylari starship caught in an emergency situation, a failing reactor, multiple system malfunctions, and a collapsing artificial gravity field. A no-win scenario. A challenge of leadership and strategy. Sci-Fi explained, her voice cool yet curious. The Vaylari trained for decades to handle such situations. Let us see if your instincts are as strong as your body. Dorian smirked. You want to see how a human handles a disaster. He cracked his knuckles. All right, let's play. The simulation begins. The moment the simulation started, alarms blared through the holographic ship. Fires broke out in different sections. Oxygen levels dropped, and virtual Vaylari crew members panicked as the situation spiraled out of control. Silverin, still recovering from his earlier losses, stepped forward. Allow me to demonstrate the correct response. He moved with precision, his long fingers dancing over the holographic controls. He directed crew members with calm efficiency, following Vaylari emergency protocols perfectly. But within minutes, the ship's reactor overloaded. The simulation failed. Silverin frowned, stepping back. That should not have happened. Sci-Fi's gaze didn't shift. You followed our procedures exactly, and yet you failed. She turned to Dorian. Your turn, Captain. Dorian rolled his shoulders. Let's see what we can do. As the alarms blared again, Dorian didn't rush. He didn't follow the same careful, practiced steps as Silverin. Instead, he adapted immediately. Seal off Deck 7 before the fire spreads. His voice was steady, commanding. Reroute power through the auxiliary core to slow the reactor overload. Don't waste time on minor systems. Focus on life support and navigation. His fingers moved quickly over the controls, but his focus was on the bigger picture. He didn't just react to problems. He anticipated them. He changed the plan before the simulation could throw a new problem at him. The delegates leaned forward, watching as the Valeri ship in the simulation stabilized. The reactor didn't overload. The crew didn't panic. The ship survived. Dorian took a step back as the simulation ended, a successful mission report flashing across the screen. He exhaled. That's how you get out of a no-win scenario. The shift in power. For a long moment, Sci-Fi said nothing. Then, she did something that no one had ever seen a Valeri do before. She inclined her head. A gesture of respect. Perhaps, she murmured, we underestimated you after all. The other delegates exchanged glances. The power balance in the galaxy had just shifted, and for the first time, humanity stood at the center of it. The chamber was silent. No one spoke. No one moved. For the first time in history, the proud Valeri had acknowledged a human as an equal. Dorian Voss stood at the center of it all, his sharp green eyes sweeping across the room. He could feel the weight of every gaze, every thought racing behind those alien expressions. The delegates, many of whom had dismissed humanity as a lesser species, now looked at him with something new. Respect. Maybe even a little fear. Lady Sci-Fi, always poised, watched him carefully. Her silver-blue skin shimmered under the chamber lights, her violet eyes unreadable. It seems humanity is full of surprises, Captain. Dorian smirked. We try. Lord Silverin, still standing near the holographic console, frowned but remained silent. He had nothing left to say. He had lost. A new proposition. Sci-Fi turned toward the other delegates. We Valeri have long believed ourselves to be the pinnacle of evolution. But today, we have seen something different. Her voice was smooth, controlled, but there was an unmistakable shift in her tone. She wasn't just speaking to them. She was preparing them. Humanity does not rely on perfection. They do not follow rigid structures or predetermined paths. And yet, they survive. They evolve. They win. A murmur rippled through the chamber. The Drekthar warrior, a hulking reptilian figure, rumbled in agreement. Strength is not only in the body, but in the mind. The human adapts faster than any warrior I have seen. The Zerix Collective, their glowing yellow eyes flickering in synchronized thought, added efficiency and unpredictability. A dangerous combination. Sci-Fi turned back to Dorian. The Valeri do not form alliances lightly, but I believe we have reached a moment where our traditions must change. She extended her hand once more. Captain Voss, will humanity stand with us? Dorian looked at her hand, then back at the gathered leaders. He wasn't just speaking for himself now. He was speaking for all of humanity. He stepped forward, grasping her hand firmly. We stand with those who stand with us. Not everyone approves. A sharp voice cut through the chamber. This is madness. All eyes turned as a Valeri noble, Lord Valtherus, stepped forward, his silver-blue skin flushed with anger. You would break tradition for them. He sneered, his gaze locked on Sci-Fi. They are not refined. They are not superior. They err. Exactly what we need. Sci-Fi interrupted, her voice like steel. Valtherus stiffened, but she didn't back down. The galaxy is changing, Valtherus. Clinging to old ideas will not protect us. We must evolve. Her violet eyes flicked toward Dorian. And who better to learn from than a species that thrives on change? Valtherus's fists clenched. You are making a mistake. Dorian, unfazed, smirked. If we are, we'll adapt. The chamber erupted into discussion, some supporting Sci-Fi's words, others questioning the sudden shift in power. But one thing was clear. The old order was breaking, and humanity was at the center of what came next. The chamber buzzed with tension. Some delegates murmured in approval, recognizing the shift in power. Others remained stiff, clearly uneasy with the idea of treating humans as equals. Captain Dorian Voss stood firm, his expression calm but alert. He had fought in wars, survived impossible battles, and faced down threats far worse than a few disgruntled nobles. But here, in this chamber of politics and alliances, he was fighting a different kind of battle, one of perception and pride. Lady Sci-Fi remained poised, but even she could sense the resistance. Not everyone was ready to embrace the idea that humanity belonged among the galaxy's elite. Then Lord Valtherus stepped forward once again. His violet eyes burned with defiance. "Words and games mean little," he said, his voice sharp. "If humanity truly deserves to stand among us, then let them prove it in the way that matters most." Dorian raised an eyebrow. "Another test. I thought I already passed the entrance exam." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd, but Valtherus was not amused. "One test means nothing. The Valari value more than physical strength and quick thinking. We value honor. We value skill in battle." He took a step forward, his silver-blue skin gleaming under the chamber lights. "I challenge you, Captain Voss. A duel. One-on-one. No tricks. No simulations. Just you and me. A duel of wills." The room fell silent. A duel among the Valari was not just about combat. It was about status, respect, and proving one's worth. Sci-Fi narrowed her eyes. "This is unnecessary, Valtherus." He turned to her. "You speak of change, but I will not let the traditions of our people be cast aside so easily. If humanity is to be our equal, they must face us directly." Dorian exhaled slowly. He wasn't surprised. When people like Valtherus couldn't win with logic, they always fell back on violence. He grinned. "All right, I'll fight you." Sci-Fi tensed. "Dorian." He turned to her. "If this is what it takes to prove we belong, then let's do it. Besides," he smirked at Valtherus, "I've been itching for a real challenge." Valtherus's lips curled into a smug smile. "Then it is decided. We fight by the traditions of the Valari. No weapons, no armor, just skill and strength." Dorian cracked his knuckles. "Sounds fair to me." The arena awaits. Within minutes, the chamber transformed. The center of the room shifted, revealing a circular dueling platform, surrounded by glowing Valari runes. Dorian removed his jacket and shirt, stepping onto the platform with only his combat pants and boots. His muscular frame, covered in scars from past battles, was now fully visible. Gasps rippled through the Valari crowd. Dorian had seen that reaction before, the shock that humans were not as fragile as they appeared. His body was not like the lean, flawless forms of the Valari. It was something different. It was hardened, built through struggle, through war. Even Sci-Fi's violet eyes lingered for a second too long before she looked away. Valtherus, now shirtless as well, stepped forward. His Valari physique was sleek and elegant, built for speed and agility. He looked at Dorian with disdain. "Strength alone will not save you, human." Dorian just rolled his shoulders. "We'll see." The duel was about to begin, and the fate of humanity's place in the galaxy hung in the balance. The dueling platform shimmered under the chamber lights. The tension in the air was thick. Captain Dorian Voss and Lord Valtherus stood face to face, muscles taut, eyes locked. This was not just a fight. It was a battle for respect, for humanity's place among the stars. The Valari noble sneered. "Last chance, human. Yield now, and I might spare you the humiliation." Dorian just smirked. "Let's get this over with." A Valari official raised his hand. The chamber fell silent. Then, begin. A battle of styles. Valtherus moved first, lunging with inhuman speed. His body blurred, striking like a serpent. His fist shot forward, aiming for Dorian's ribs. But Dorian was ready. He sidestepped, twisted, and brought his forearm up to block. The impact sent a shockwave through his muscles, but he gritted his teeth. He had fought worse. Valtherus followed up with a spinning kick, fast, precise, deadly. Dorian ducked, feeling the air shift above his head. He countered with a powerful punch to Valtherus's ribs. The Valari staggered back, eyes wide. The crowd gasped. Strength versus speed. Dorian didn't wait. He pressed forward. A jab, a hook, a crushing elbow. Each strike backed by human resilience, by years of training and battle. Valtherus dodged and weaved, his movements fluid and elegant. But he had never fought someone like Dorian before. Dorian didn't rely on speed or flawless technique. He relied on instinct, adaptability, and raw endurance. Valtherus tried to keep his distance, launching quick strikes. But Dorian took the hits and kept going. He absorbed the pain, turned it into fuel. Then he saw his opening. Valtherus hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. That was all Dorian needed. With a sudden burst, Dorian tackled Valtherus, slamming him to the ground. The chamber shook from the impact. Dorian pinned him down, his forearm pressing against the Valeri's chest. Yield. Valtherus struggled, but Dorian didn't budge. His strength was undeniable. The noble's breath came in sharp gasps. His pride burned in his eyes. But he knew he had lost. His jaw tightened. Then, finally, he spoke. I yield. A turning point. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Then the Drekthar warrior roared in approval. The Xyrix collective blinked in synchronized acknowledgement. Even some of the Valeri nobles exchanged uncertain glances. Dorian stood, offering his hand. For a moment, Valtherus hesitated. Then, grudgingly, he took it. As Dorian pulled him to his feet, Lady Sci-Fi stepped forward. She looked at Dorian with something new in her gaze. Not just respect, possibility. You have proven yourself, Captain Voss, not just in battle, but in spirit. She turned to the other delegates. The galaxy is changing. The Valeri must change with it. Dorian met her gaze. So does that mean we're allies now? Sci-Fi smiled. A small, knowing smile. I believe we are. The chamber erupted in discussion, but the decision had already been made. Humanity was no longer an afterthought. They had earned their place. And this was only the beginning.